Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Pokemon Go, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using the code Omnipoke. For today's video, I have finally returned from the London 2022 Pokemon World Championships. I had an absolutely incredible time. Easily my favourite worlds. I was commentating and not playing in the tournament. So if you want to go back and watch any of the games, I'm partnered up with the wonderful Ross Gilbert, and we had a great time commentating. There were some epic games, actually. And if you do really like watching Pokemon and high stakes, high level action, the entire top 9 games were a treat. There was some really excellent stuff going on. Of course, all 4 days of the competition were amazing. I had a great time. And it boiled down to these top 9 decks that we'll be looking at today. There's actually only 6 decks to look at because 3 of them are doubled up. We have Daichi and Ryota, we have Andrew and Calvin, as well as James and Kywin. So there was certainly great ironed out 60s that were perfect for the tournament, as we can see, and 9 very successful players with great records. So Andrei Shkubal was able to win the World Championships. My CCG teammate, who is an incredible player and has done very well on the international stage, once again proves it with a very crafty Arceus, Flying Pikachu, Hisuian Decidueye V-Star decklist with Bibarel as a backup draw engine. We saw from the NAIC that Arceus, Bibarel, Flying Peak was already a very good metagame choice from Azul GG, and this combination was of course very strong. At the time, Azul was playing a 1-1 Crobat VMAX line to have a better time into Mew, and ended up being helpful against some control players. But Andre expected more Arceus and wanted to have a fighting package in his deck list rather than relying on the likes of Sharing Care to bounce around in a mirror match. He instead went for a 2-2 line with Decidueye. The regular V gives you an easy answer to Miltanks as well, which is nice and means you don't need to play that Phoebe Palpad stuff, and you can just have a more streamlined support account. And you have the V-Star to Somersault Feathers your way through opposing Arceus in one shot, which is very, very strong, of course. Now, Andre actually hit a lot of Palkia in day 2 of the tournament. I think he hit 7 in Swiss, so got a lot of mileage out of the Pikachu. Also, I think was able to use the Decidueye well in Arceus Mirrors, which of course we saw later on in his tournament run. So really nice to see the Arceus powering up these guys and just having the Lightning and Fighting Energy in here, as well as one Capture, just helping you get more Pokemon into play. I think the things I love most about Andre's list are the 4th copy of Boss's Orders rather than the standard 3. Time after time, I find myself talking about how Andre needed Boss to win games, because you're mostly, as long as you're not one-shotting stuff through weakness, you're two-shotting stuff, and your opponent can like retreat out of that and force you to have Gust. So just having Boss on demand was really vital for Andre, and I think with Incisors and 4 Boss, you see it a lot, so you even have the Fish that can help you get there. And Fish Bat isn't something we've seen a whole lot of recently, so much emphasis on the Inteleon engine, but Fish Bat really does give you a lot of control over your turns, which is excellent. The other thing I love is the 4-path 4 Marnie as well. You're constantly hand disrupting Inteleon players and stopping them from having massive combos against you, and you're using Path of the Peak to deny Mew players. Without having Darkness Energy, it's really important to have Stadium on demand all the time. Obviously disruptive against Radiant Greninja, and can also be a defensive play in the mirror match, because you play your own Pumpkaboo, you can just slam it down, hoping to deny the opponent's Starbirth. So, very streamlined, simplistic list. Thanks to the double Colorless Energy cost in Decidueye and Flying Peak, you can maximize your double turbos as well, and it feels really good for getting Trinity Charge plays off. So, yeah, very strong metagame call. I think people were really on the down low with Dunsparce in Arc Intel, and I think in general, Arc Intel was way less played than many people expected going into the World Championships. In day 1, it was far less popular than touted, maybe because it's a sort of slower archetype and people were worried about tying, but also its matchup spread wasn't that good. You know, it wasn't exactly favoured into Palkia, it wasn't favoured into many matchups, it was just kind of good and consistent. And those, you know, having so many just like close games makes it a difficult choice to actually play the deck at Worlds, where you need to give yourself an advantage, especially when you're up against some of the other best players in the world. Simply out consistencying them isn't often good enough. So we see Andre having answers in terms of type coverage and just one-shotting, and that's a much better route, I think. So yeah, really amazing 60. Then we go to Daichi Shimada and Ryota Ishiyama's lists. Daichi, of course, our second place player, and I haven't actually got Ryota's to hand, but I believe they're playing almost the exact 60. If not, they're just one or two cards different. But the core concept was constructed together, and that is to not play the barrel, but have a really, really hard win against Palkia. Like, this is one of the strongest Palkia matchups in the game, I think, thanks to not only the Flying Pikachu hitting for key weaknesses, but also the 2-2 line of the Thunderous Awakening Jolteon, shutting down the entire engine of Palkia because everything is water. So, yeah, having this capsule package in the deck really did punish the Palkia matchups and made sure that you were just really in control of those, which is insane to see. We saw Daichi certainly had the good bracket in his favor where he was able to knock out 2 Palkias on his way to the finals, which is amazing to see, and it was fairly routine. I think he dropped a game here or there, but in general, once the Jolteon was up, it was basically Palkia scooping. Like 2 turns later, they couldn't do anything. So the Jolteon, very strong, very disruptive, also gives you some gameplay into Arc Intel, of course, as well. So that's another thing to bear in mind. I actually don't like the EV split that they went for. Not sure if they just couldn't find enough EV in time, because I don't see a reason to play this card when you could have an extra 70 hit point Pokemon, but that's just a small nitpick from me. Otherwise, I did really like the 60. The other thing that I'm sort of on the fence about is the Galarian Moltres V. Yes, you're trying to patch up another dicey matchup in the Mew. This list only plays the 3 path. But I still kind of like the Crobat VMAX more, I think, in general. The only thing I would say is that the Moltres allows you to try and throw like a Pumpkaboo or an Eevee into the active position in the opening stages to defend yourself against aggressive Meloetta and it not change the prize map, right? Because you'll only use 2 prizes, like the Moltres and your Arceus pieces in that matchup. You won't really care to use your Pikachu. So that's one small thing you have going for you compared to if you were to play a Crobat VMAX. So yeah, I don't know if there was much mileage out of the Moltres for either of these players, but it was a small nod towards the Mew matchup. And of course, it gives you a really good time into Mewtwo v Union, because they can hammer away all you want, but you're not going to stop the Dire Flame Wings recovering at least the dark part here, and there was already an Ordinary Rod to recover more energies to make sure you could just Aura Burn the entire game. So maybe that's the main reason why they opted for this route rather than just having the Crobat, so you have more recyclability. So maybe it is a decent choice overall. And again, having the Decidueye with the inbuilt answer to Miltank is nice for that matchup. And Mewtwo was very popular day 1, don't forget. So maybe that was the core reason. Outside of that, not too many dissimilar cards here. The heavy memory capsule, so you can just research in Marnie and find it, is always nice. You've got the 3 bosses orders and the 3 path. I think a big reason why Andre won was because he played 4 copies of both of these cards. So I would look to try and make space. But of course, the Jolteon takes up more than the Barrel anyway. And also the energy line, because you're squeezing in the Moltres, is slightly more questionable, I guess, is the best way to put it. But ultimately, very similar lists for our first, second, and third place. Essentially, pick Jolteon if you want to hard win your Palkia and have a time into Arc Intel. Or pick the Barrel if you just want stable, good draw throughout the entire game, which obviously was the reason why Andre was able to beat Ryota and Daichi ultimately. In at our other top 4 placement, we had James Cox and also Kaiwin Kababe in top 8. Both were piloting the same 60. We know the Australian contingent test together and oftentimes bring the same 60 to the table, and it was the same in this instance, where we have a VIP pass build of Palkia V-Star. Pretty straightforward, does have the Crab to respect control archetypes with the Trigger Avalanche helping you in that late game scenario. And also having Destroyer Punch for burst potential against them as well if they're not respecting Inteleon pings over a couple of turns. So that's kind of cool. I think Liam Halliburton in his senior finals match even used Star Portal to power up a Destroyer Punch. I don't think he actually used it in the game, but it was an option for them, which is kind of spicy to see. So it gives you some random burst potential in spots when you play quick shooting. Outside of that, not much surprising here. Was going for Tool Jammer rather than Scrapper, which is, of course, something that might be changing now that we have seen Jolteon to such a high placement, so just a small tweak there. I think the only other thing that I would think about tweaking to improve my time into some of these flying Pikachus, and especially the Jolteon, would be adding in Crobat. I think heavy VIP is probably just weaker into a Jolteon lock, so just having Quick Ball in a high account and having a Crobat V in your deck probably gives you some outs to draw some cards, and then as soon as you find Irida, you can Irida Scrapper and get going. So that would be something I would be debating about Palkia. I still think it's certainly good, even though it got demolished in cuts. There were still 5 of them to make it into top 8 with an amazing record. Into top 9. So it's certainly a powerful archetype still, and a pretty straightforward, consistent shell here from our Australian players. Then we have Andrew Estrada trying to get a back-to-back world champion win under his belt. Ended up in 5th place. And also we had Calvin Connor, who was our 9th seed, but was able to play an extra game because it was asymmetrical top cut, and actually played against Otavio Gouveia in the sort of winning in 2 top 8. So awesome to see that we didn't just have to say goodbye to Calvin straight away, and actually this mirror match series was very close and down to the wire at points. But again, it's a real demonstration that this deck list was also very strong, and this is a heavier ball search based build from them. Again, fairly straightforward and simplistic that we see here. Not too much to be said. This is playing the Ordinary Rod and the Pal Pad for some extra recovery here and there, is playing the Path of the Peak, and is playing Leon for extra burst potential. Again, the Jammer is something that was helpful for them throughout the weekend, of course, and is very strong in Mirror. When you have the burst potential of Leon and you can Jammer your opponent at the same time, it gives you a lot of wiggle room to play around with your own bench and keep limited at points. But not having Scrapper is obviously punishing for Jolteon, and I think that will be changing going forward. In at number 6, we have our only Mew from Andre Chason. And they were in game 3 with a heads flip on Cram to basically knock out Andre Scubal straight away in top 8, but was unfortunately not able to get there. But this is a very streamlined, straightforward Mew list. You actually love to see something so simplistic when there's been all sorts of stuff coming into the Mew in different points. But yeah, just a very straightforward 60. Phones being favoured over Trekking Shoes is always an interesting debate. No split between them, just saying that phones are better, which is really interesting. To have more control over what you see throughout the entire game, which definitely makes sense in my opinion, but does lock you out if you have no Genesects in the opening stages at times. And we did see Andre have a couple awkward hands here and there, but yeah, straightforward 60. They're very accomplished with Mew already. I think they've been playing it since Fusion Strike came out and have had great results, and been all in on the archetype, and yeah, it really shows because they played Mew very well. Certainly in spots where I was watching and I was thinking there were tight decisions, and they usually made the right one, which was cool. So yeah, a very strong Mew, straightforward, doing its thing, out consistencying and beating down lots of archetypes. Again, very cool. And I think we're still in that case where Mew probably is not the deck that you can respect the most in the room. I think you still need to respect Palkia very highly and respect Arceus. Which means Mew is sort of in that free land where it can do whatever it wants and just has to survive Path Marnie and Path Roxanne essentially, and that's exactly why the Pumpkaboo was in the deck list. And then the final list we have from Otavio Gouveia, who gave the coolest interview I've seen for a long time. Really amazing to just see his passion for the game, and played the Palkia Inteleon. A couple interesting tricks up his sleeve here. Has the Cancelling Clone, which I think we actually saw him use in the 8v9 face-off, where he was able to gust up a Manaphy and clone it for a couple prize cards. Very cool play with your Greninja, and gives you another means, as well as the Aqua Bullet, to get around Miltank if need be. So that was very cool. I think it's mostly for the mirror, though, just so you can catch lots of Drizzle and Sobble when you need to, which is awesome. And otherwise, again, a straightforward 60 on the whole here. So yeah, Palkia doing its thing, still going very far in the tournament, and had a great showing overall. Was very popular throughout the weekend, and was certainly strong in a few different variations. A couple with the VIP pass, some with just heavier ball search. And I think going forward, to respect Jolteon, we probably will be going Scrapper. We probably will have Crobat V in the list, is what I'm expecting most. There's also the sort of outside chance that people adapt towards, Bibarel and like Ice Rider with Palkia as well. That's another alternative that people have thrown around pre-Worlds, of course, as well. So there's a few things there. I think the Arc Desi Peak, I think the Flying Peak part will stay the same, but I think Decidueye probably gets less value than it did for Worlds in the next month or so, because I think there's a special event in Europe and then a regional in LATAM and NA before Lost Origins drops. So reacting to this World Championships, I would imagine any Arc player is probably playing Dunsparce again because Decidueye did so well. And I think then it means that this list of Arc, Peak, Bibarel is unfavored once again into Arc Intel. Now there's headaches around Arc Intel because there's Jolteon from the Japanese side of things, so that power struggle is going to be interesting to watch and see how things develop. So yeah, it's going to be more adaptations for that final set of big tournaments before we get into the Lost Origins meta. There's still so much I haven't discussed about the World Championships. There's still reveals that we have to talk about. There's still the location of Worlds, and we've, of course, already seen a ton of tournaments for the 2023 season as well. So I've got to catch up on a ton of content. Worlds was amazing. Let me know how you thought I did on stream, if anyone was watching that. Of course, I'm not just fishing for compliments. If you have any constructive criticisms, I would love to hear it as well. And yeah, let me know what your favourite deck was from this World Championships. What player were you rooting for? And what archetype do you think is best positioned for the next set of tournaments? I'd love to hear it all down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.